All right. Seems I record something like this every time my cat is in heat. So make of that what you will. I am at 3:59:57. They are talking about, is it Rauschenberg and the white paintings? So I had this whole diatribe ready to go, and I pulled all the reference, and I'll still go through it. But I'm listening. I'm going through and listening to the conversation and everything another time. And I think the Efap people pretty much covered it, which is their whole point is trying to figure out how meaning is derived in a work of art. And it's like that's a tall order, and they kind of like did this high level thing where they're running through all these scenarios where if someone didn't meet, if someone hung up something accidentally in a gallery and someone got meaning from it, does that count? What about a sunset where there's no creator, so to speak? Does that count? And so there's all these things about what's inspirational, what makes meaning, what doesn't, whatever. And what's interesting about Potato Guy is, he's talking about these Rauschenbergs as like white series, as if the thing that really got me to actually fucking start recording this was he said the phrase that he feels like any painter who has any experience painting would instantly see that this is good, right? And I call like absolute fucking bullshit on that. Painters like paint. They don't like white. But I pulled some interesting reference where I think it's less about paint than anything else. Here's the thing. If you're a painter, you like seeing paint, right? So if you were to talk about like abstract expressionism or something, you could say that there's a quality of paint itself that the abstract expressionist would appreciate, and like that is very true. In my experience, painters like seeing paint. You can't really get around that, right? I think if you're really into contemporary art, like modern painting, and like I don't even know if you could call this stuff modern. Like I pulled out here. And this is about the third time recording at this. And since the other two recordings, I sort of pulled out, my old, with all the, this is new, but all the other stuff was from art school and research and stuff like that. So it's the Herschel B. Chip Theories of Modern Art. This is like a mainstay if you're doing any kind of research into modern art. I haven't touched it in like 100 years because it literally doesn't matter. I'm going through like the Clement Greenberg theories because I talked about Greenberg a little bit earlier in reference to Pollock. Like they show up together and the theories of art. And it's really funny stuff, but it's very quaint. And it's quaint nowadays in a way that it was not quaint even in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I actually cared about this stuff, like the aughts, when I actually researched stuff like that. And I pretty much put down gallery level art probably around 2013. I think the last show I did was in 2013, 2014. Like this behind me was painted in 2013. And so, gosh, that's been 10 years, man. And so I've still painted and stuff, but I haven't been like showing and selling, I mostly just been in the corporate world doing corporate stuff, right? So anyway, when I see the Rauschenberg and the three paintings with the lines, I instantly think design, right? And I said it earlier. If if this kind of contemporary work really floats your boat, get into design, start learning design. It's way more relevant to design. Okay. And this level of abstraction probably didn't much exist in terms of theory until, modernism, But anyway, my point was I was getting into the modern art theories, and a lot of this stuff was made like post World War II, which is essentially in like the postmodern era. But this is very much modern art, like capital M modern. So that essentially means that kind of like what I was saying before, and most theorists will talk about it, like you don't know where you are until you've been in it for a while, right? So looking back, like from the 80s and 90s, they could say, yeah, postmodernism is basically a post World War II thing, and capital M modernism is basically, 1900 to 1950 or World War II thing. And even though all the precursors to capital M modernism were happening in the late 1800s, so you're like in the 1890s or something like that, and 1880s, 1890s. A lot of it has to do with just manufacture. I mean, so I'm here at 3:59:57 looking at that artwork, and they've talked about it and what it's really about. And what was funny is I was at I think it was Rags went through earlier, and or maybe it was Fringy, but one of them did a whole justification for like how to write meaning into one of these Rauschenberg white paintings, and it was perfect how art schoolers bullshit through like infusing meaning, infusing their works with meaning, right? And what happens in art school, at least in the Bay Area art school, was that it becomes an excuse for people not wanting to do their work. People get in there and they were told years before that anything they want to be art is art, and that is a gigantic invitation to not put any fucking effort into it, and they don't. And people just bullshit through it. And I don't care what art school you went to, I don't care what you do, the likelihood that that you could just bullshit your way into actual gallery and actual money is very low. And these days, it's so, it's so like elite class and so incestuous and all the. You probably can't even get into like modern art anything without being being in this sort of upper class that feeds directly into this hoity-toity shit, and even then you probably have to put in some work. I mean, I just looked through. It was like a 2.5 hour long video, but there's a bunch like that where it's just like a contemporary painting gallery. There's all these galleries that displayed their work, and it looked like it was 2022 or something. It's a California art show. All these different galleries are showing their paintings, and I took all these screenshots, and there's just brilliant stuff. I love it. It's freaking incredible, and there's just a lot of people. You can go through. If you're trained, you can tell where they're using color theory, where they're using art theory, where they're art theory like graphical theory, where they're using some of the contemporary concepts and postmodern. Like you can just see it, but in the end, they're all paintings, and 99% of them are excellent, and it's just beautiful work. Like people still don't get into galleries by just bullshitting in there, and that goes into what they were just talking about, which was should a painting stand on its own? And it's like you don't get to make that decision. Your fucking theory can be whatever you want it. You can say that, like, I mean, we talked about all the scatological art. You can say that, photocopying your, I want to get very vulgar. Imagine the most vulgar stuff ending up on a canvas, and you claim that's art, and then you try to hang it up. Okay? Regardless of what you just imagined, it has happened, and people have tried to pull that off, right? And maybe it has been pulled off one or two times over time. But for the most part, people don't fucking care, because no one is going to be inspired or impressed or sell or be able to sell things that suck. In the end, regardless of how difficult it is to justify a technique or where it came from or what the lineage is, and I'm going to go through some of these walkthroughs, some of these gallery walkthroughs, and just do some commentary on them, because I loved it. I was so into it, dude. But regardless, yeah, the paintings do have to stand on their own, because that's how things are displayed in a gallery. You're producing an object. That's what fine art is. It's an artifact, and it's an object, and it's an object that needs to last through time, so you can say that your empty NFT is an actual thing. Bullshit it is. Someone got away with that once. That's it. Right? Rauschenberg got away with white paintings once. You can't go back and do a Rauschenberg. You know what's worth money? The name Rauschenberg. With the hand of that guy who put the paint on the canvas that was white. Potato Guy's totally wrong. No one can see that that's it. It doesn't look, the most you can see about that Rauschenberg, that 4 canvas thing, you could speak about the graphic, and I'll do that in just a minute. I'll tell you what's good about it and why it's good. And there is a graphic theory behind it, right? A design theory. And if you understand design, and if you've been trained on design, you'll understand why those could work, right? But as a painter, they don't really work. As a painter, you got one shot to pull off some bullshit like that. And Rauschenberg had a series, and like that was it. He didn't even do that, right? He had some other white paintings that were far more interesting than that actually had different types of white. And I'll go through a white painting that I think is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But it's because it masterfully compresses all these design and painting principles into one very simple work. And I don't know if the artist intended to do that or not, but I bet they did. I bet they did. Even though it's really weird. It's a weirdly titled painting. But anyway, back to just finish up with the artifact idea. When you're a painter, the whole point of being a painter is that you're creating something that, as an artifact, has value. And you can use a superficial association to a word like artifact, as in, like, if they dig this up from the sand in 2,000 years and it's intact, people look at it and go, oh, fuck. This guy knew what they were doing, whatever it is. Oh, this ended up in a noble's, apartment suite or something like that. They must have, it must have been competing with, I mean, you would say what you want about the nobility of any era. They have access to all the best shit. So if your work ends up in the collection of someone with some money and some access, it says something about your level of skill, right? It says something about the permanence, or at least the perceived value of your work. And in the future, people will be able to look at it and say, I can see why that ended up in the king's chambers, right? And I mean, I'm thinking, when I think artifacts, I think of like Usually my mind goes to Roman pottery. So if you ever want to know like what a good example of like an artifact that stands on its own, and this I'm not thinking literally because pottery, ha ha ha, stands on its own. I mean like is complete in and of itself, and yeah, I mean the fact it can stand on its own isn't just a metaphor. It's like, do you know what this is? Well, I've seen modern sculptures that have a real hard time standing up on their own. They have to have, like, that's not going to last. I don't care what it is. It's not going to last. If in 2,000 years you can dig it up from the fucking sand and or the dirt or where and brush it off and it can literally stand up and you know that there was intentionality behind it and it has some beautiful inlays and there's some real artistic merit and use value in it and it's got the whole package right there. That's an artifact. That deserves its place in history. And that's all we can ask for as artists. So you're not going to be standing there in 2,000 years bullshitting the people digging up your work. And you're not going to be able to bullshit them and say, guess what I came up with in the last 5 minutes of critique in art school that justified, like, just in time, so I didn't get an F on the fucking project, why this works. You don't get to do that. If it doesn't say it in and of itself, I don't care what your theory says. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know? And that's something that that's an advantage painters have and sculptors and furniture makers and like real visceral objects oriented artists have. Architects, especially maybe more than any, over a lot of the modern mediums like film and video and photography and whatnot. I mean, maybe your photographic print will survive. Great. Maybe films will survive back in the day and people can kind of reverse engineer from a can of film how it worked, right? But this idea that in the future they're going to be able to like reconstruct the display logic of the digital painting you made, like that's highly unlikely, right? I have shit I did in Photoshop in art school 20 years ago where you can't display it anymore. If you didn't print it out, if you don't have it on other media, like you're gonna have a real tough time. And like, what about in another 20 years? A real tough time displaying this stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, and you can see I'm kind of jumping here. Like conceptually, it should probably stand. It will have to stand on its own. Physically, as an object that exists in the universe, it's going to have to stand on its own, or at least maintain physical integrity enough to be fixed up and brushed off and displayed, right? And if the code is too complex, you're not even going to be able to display it, right? So painting, I was thinking about the white. First of all, I'm looking at the set of 4 paintings now. It's actually kind of brilliant. It's going to be hard to believe. And then the Rauschenberg white paintings are actually kind of brilliant too. But it's brilliant from a design standpoint. Supremacist composition on white. All right. Supremacist and white in the same thing is super politically charged these days. I'm not going to fucking touch that. I have no idea what he meant by it. It sounds like he meant something retarded, And who cares? But it could have been he was speaking strictly of design principles. So if I was going to look at this in the future and I saw this exact painting and someone said, is this art and does it stand on its own? I would say, I don't know if it's art, but this person is clearly highly trained in the arts of the day, design, painting, the optical realities of their mediums, chromatic and optic effects of paint itself, the sort of science and art of balancing shapes. There is a high degree of logic in this, so it's likely that because it's kind of binary logic that it's mathematical. It would come from a civilization with a mathematical understanding. Outside of the fact that like there are perfect right angles, there are other conceptual sort of binaries happening. When I say optics, this is what I mean. Every color has a warm and a cool version of the color, right? There isn't just yellow. Okay, you can kind of say there. You can say there's a yellow, a magenta, and a cyan, and these are perfect colors, and they're perfectly right in the middle of warm and cool, right? But a magenta, the minute a magenta starts going toward the cyan, it starts getting cool, and the minute a magenta starts going toward yellow, it starts getting warm, right? And it's like that with every one of these colors, and like. You can do that. There are photoemulsions that have a certain sort of thickness where when light is reflected through them, it will vibrate at a certain wavelength, and you can get as basically as close as humanly possible to these wavelengths. But for the most part, every color is going to be tending toward the colors on its side. So a red is going to be tending toward either warm red or a cool red. Yellow, there are warm yellows and cool yellows. You can do the math, right? There are warm whites and there are cool whites, just like there are warm blacks and cool blacks. Painters do this all the time, right? Where you mix two super intense colors and they get something that looks like black. But if you were to put a speck of any other color in it, you'd realize that it's not black at all. And you had no idea because your brain just sees the value. The value is just whiteness and blackness, right? Your chroma is like, or your hue rather, is what the color value is, right? So this is really interesting, this painting, because your white, they're basically precisely the same value. Okay, which means you have an understanding of value, which is lightness or darkness. Okay, and then but then one of these values is cool and one is warm. So you instantly know that they have a conception of the entire color wheel, which is to say that everything tends either toward warm or cool, right? So instantly you know, just from two white squares, that this person is trained in graphic arts, the graphic sciences. They know the basic structure of visual perception, right? Because the fact that you'd put your warm and your cool in the same place, and the only contrast is color contrast, it shows some high level understanding of these principles, right? And then of course you have like the square that's off kilter. Well, what's it doing? Well, it's cutting through the top right corner here in a way that makes is it an isosceles triangle? I think it's an isosceles, but anyway, it's very reminiscent of mathematical principles, namely like the Pythagorean theorem, where you're essentially building a triangle by using three squares with 90 degree angles in one area, right? So the precise math doesn't matter as much as the fact that the small square is of the same dimensions as the large square, right? And then the smaller square is slightly off kilter, but it's not randomly off kilter. It's placed in a position that shows they understand basic principles of design. Like it's moved the center of interest to a kind of third of the canvas. And so you have all your negative spaces are imbalanced, but not dumbly, but not grossly, not disgusting. It doesn't look. It looks very deliberate. The imbalance, which denotes design, which denotes thought. Right? You can tell that just the simple act of slightly rotating the square with the same dimensions and then putting it into a highly designed position, an intelligently designed position, denotes understanding of like a whole set of like design principles, right? Namely, like how you divide up a surface, right? How you build forms, what's a closed form and an open form, things like that. Overall balance of a picture, right? So you see that the negative space at the bottom is the largest area of negative space. That's design 101, where you add visual weight to something at the bottom. That's literally visual weight. And just the fact that you put in visual weight at the bottom like that shows they understand basic design principles, right? And the fact that it's not a square, or sorry, that it is a square and it's not like a triangle, right? This is an economy of thought, right? In other words, you're not introducing a new design pattern. You're not trying to make the mind deal with two shapes now, something rectilinear like the shape of the canvas, and then a new shape inside of it. That's new. That's additional information, right? There's a thing called like algorithmic information content, right? It's this thing in physics that where you can tell how complex something is, right? Where you could have a string of 1 billion numbers, right? But if it just goes 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, you say, oh, this is really easy. It's like 0, 1 times half a billion, and you get, you can cover all the complexity of this string of 1 billion numbers with like a very simple equation. My point is, you're trying to like find this sweet spot between how complex something is and how simple the program is that can derive it, right? And the shape of the canvas itself renders this piece of information, which is like, what is a shape? Shape of canvas is shape. You just echo that inside the canvas, and you don't have to add any new information there. It shows an economy of thought, right? And kind of an economy of information, right? And the new information is really its orientation and size, which also derives the composition, right? So this is brilliant to me because the composition's good, the understanding of color is implicit, the understanding of space and design principles and visual weight is implicit, the efficiency of design and the concepts it's dealing with are implicit. And I believe an alien in from 1,000 light years away in 1,000 years after humans would look at this and say, ah, yes, intelligence built that, and it's very subtle, it's very tactfully done, and it's basically, it denotes genius. Like that's a white square inside a white square. Okay, that's a smart painting. I don't know if it's art, but it's definitely design, and it's definitely essentially a high level abstraction, like mathematics, right? So art has an advantage over math in that art can be fun, meaning that there's always a bit of a joke. There's always a bit of an inside joke. I talked about it before. The minute you say something's art, you say, well, if it's art, that means it's not math, which means I don't have to get the answer exactly right, but there's something smart here. There's something intelligent here. There's something funny here, right? Like, are you rolling with the sense of humor? So that's kind of what I see there. I had a similar, I had a similar kind of reading of the Rauschenberg paintings, like this one that Potato Guy has in back of him, right? There's literally a design principle at play here. Let's see if I can pull it up. So basics of design, right? Alignment, repetition, contrast, hierarchy, balance and symmetry, and balance intention, right? Like I said before, these are principles that were kind of like derived in the early 20th century, right? And they fit our modern era perfectly because these are general principles that are not tethered to any one culture, any one people. As we know, like the globalist society we became wanted to get rid of all associations to previous religions and creeds and blah blah blah, which, you know, you can call it folly or not. I It's like what Peterson says. It's like we're not on a long enough time scale here to make any judgments. Like nature and the course of evolution itself is going to make these judgments. We cannot and do not see it, right? But these paintings from Rauschenberg, these white paintings, there's an interesting one with this three canvases or four canvases, right, where it creates tension, right? And they talk about it. And what's weird is when I looked it up, I almost didn't do this one because when I looked it up, Rauschenberg, it shows him where he didn't display it like that. I don't know where he got that display where it makes that star pattern, but it's slightly off kilter where well, the balance of everything shifted. Well, if the balance, if it's too symmetrical, it gets boring, right? But which is a type of graphic. It's a graphic principle. It's a basic graphic principle indicated by the things I'm going to show, which say basic graphic. But this is stuff you play with when you're learning graphic design, when you're learning painting, when you're learning composite, when you're learning how to arrange things in physical spaces and play with the human ability to perceive, right? You go through all this all the time, and you get a kind of intuitive feel of it. And Rauschenberg obviously had some of this training. Like, he obviously knew these concepts. You know, this is early 20th century concepts. He's this guy's painting in the dawn of the postmodern era that's still feeling echoes of the capital M modern era. There is so much so that they don't quite know they're in a different period yet, right? That's where we're at. And but when it's displayed like that, where it's kind of off kilter, and that it goes from a sort of symmetrical balance to a balance that has created tension, and all that tension's in the middle. Where if it was symmetrical, it would be a little bit boring, but the minute they're all off, your mind is constantly turning that shape and wanting to align it and wanting to then it can't align, so it starts to spin it, and so your mind starts playing with this a little bit. And like I've said in other videos of mine too, where I talk about the painting, the ability to like play with someone's mind a little bit, but in a playful way. I don't mean all of the modern theory went into psychology, went into absolutely like the psychological warfare aspect of it it cannot be denied, right? But as an artist, you're not waging psychological warfare. You're having fun, and if you're looking at a painting, you can use basic graphic principles like line and plane to create, to evoke an effect, you know, and like that's fine. It looks, it's cool, right? Now I would take, you know, like there are guys who are masters of it. Like Rauschenberg is not a master of it. Rauschenberg is good, apparently, at breaking this stuff down to its absolute bare essence, right? where like if you have three white paintings, you have three white paintings, and the paintings themselves are not as impactful as this tiny little hairline spaces between the paintings. Like that's a mind fuck. And it's clearly plays with the idea of hierarchy, like line weight and space, and I'll throw some other. You can see this stuff implied in the industrial sense in these other photos I'm going to show you, right? If you're a web designer, right, line weight means a lot, okay? Hierarchy means a lot too. And then you start getting into psychology and stuff with certain types of repetition, but also there's this core conceptual thing going on when you're dividing up a web page. However you divide it, it's kind of elastic as you move it, right? So your lines move, but this underlying concept of like these clear spaces divided by this tiny little line that's sometimes even imaginary, and then at certain points things snap down and go into a different arrangement, but even more than that, right? Like look at material design. I'm going to show some of this material design stuff. This is Google's design principles. This was Google doing literal scientific research on how people perceive information on mobile devices, right? And this is right when after HTML and like CSS3 and HTML5, which were like the higher power versions of like the display layer of websites, right? This is when it went from really crappy websites, which were justified all the way to the top left, and everything was tiny and it took forever and it sucked, right? And then this new series, these new protocols allowed for designs which could flex and adapt. You know, it's literally called adaptive design or Flexbox or whatever you want to. And so and it allowed for like this whole new type of dynamic display, and this display layer you essentially had to be able to go from like full-sized screens all the way to like little tiny screens with the same website. And so you had to be able to accommodate that. And if you can present a ton of information here, how do you present that here and still keep track of what you're thinking about, right? And this is like capital M modernism has all the core answers to this. Like this is core art and graphic development in this period of time that looks like these Rauschenberg paintings, but instead it's actually the part of Google's well-researched protocol for how to cram this much information into an interactive thing that's this big. You know, so it's actually, it fucking mattered. And seeing as like nowadays all of the like virtually all of the wealth of the world travels through like mobile devices, which have interfaces based on these principles, like it actually fucking matters. And it helps to have some understanding in these graphic principles, right? So one of these principles is like line weight. One of it is where you divide your canvas. It's literally fucking Rauschenberg. You know, you can divide it once in the middle. You can divide it twice and have things. You divide it. I mean, so how the canvas divides, how heavy the line weight is, how intense the cast shadow is, and like all of these things, like Rosh, I don't even know if he knew it, but the guy fucking discovered he was doing material design fucking 80 years before material design, right? Or however many years. What was he, in the 50s, late 40s, early 50s? I don't know. I don't think he could foresee that, but it actually kind of says something. Now, like I've said, these are high-level abstractions. This is closer to math than it is to art, right? But then again, the crossover is kind of the fun part, right? So I get real tired of the word art. In art school, I came up with this theory that like art didn't exist because it doesn't. Because art's what we think of as art or painting is literally a very specific market practice that like opened up in the 20th century where a kind of new middle class could actually afford to buy paintings. Whereas before, paintings were literally a type of like documentation, like there was no other way to document someone's face but to make some kind of work, either in sculpture or in painting form, right? What is it, the Bayeux Tapestry or something like that? These old tapestries that chronicled ancient battles, or these old relief sculptures on the walls of Egyptian like pharaohs, where they talk about succession and battles and how certain things were won. I mean, like the whole Code of Hammurabi, where the North and South Nile, or the Upper and Lower Nile Valley were unified or something like that. I mean, like that's not the same operation as nowadays, like entering into an art market and trying to sell to a well-to-do middle class your painting. And either if it's a smart painting or a beautiful painting or whatever painting, it doesn't matter. The Google like material design is closer to the kind of stuff that was happening in like the Middle Ages with art. It's closer to material than it is, trying to sell something that someone can hang above their mantle, right? And so what we consider art these days, that is to say an art market, is like a very new concept, and like in an art market, it's real simple. You're like, is that art? Is that not art? I don't know. Anything could be art. I don't know. I plumb the depths of my soul and my psyche to create this art, which is what I believe makes it good. Well, I know the principles of design, which is what I think makes this art look. Doesn't fucking matter. Doesn't matter. Will someone buy it? Yes. Then it's in the art market, right? And markets are funny because there won't always be markets for everything, right? There used to be a market for chickens as a kind of status symbol. No one uses chickens for status symbols anymore. In fact, that seems silly. But it used to be that chickens were status symbols. And the price of chickens and different variations and breeds of chickens skyrocketed. And then collapsed, right? So I'm not convinced there will always be an art market. I would like to think there will be because I'm an artist, right? And in a way, I'm not necessarily making things for an art market. I'm making artifacts. So at least when it's hard to say, because as an artist, I always thought long term like that. I'm like, is this going to look good in 1,000 years? That's what I'm painting for. I'm painting for, my goal is in 1,000 years, someone looks at it and goes, holy shit, that's good. Done. Like that's it. That's the goal, right? And then you can lament all you want about whether or not anyone's buying your shit. So art market, I don't know. Say something is art, you're really asking, if you're asking if something is art, you're really asking whether or not it can survive in the art market, okay? I prefer to ask the question, is something a worthy artifact? And then cross my fingers that there's a market for it,